Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья.
Hello, dear friends. Welcome to our final discussion within the framework of celebrating the 25th anniversary of Moscow Institute of Psychoanalysis. We decided to call this lost encounter the birth of the psyche and the psyche of the birth. Today we are going to talk about the development of the psyche and the emergence of the psyche, the interconnection of nutrition and the development of the fetus, and about many other things. So now I would like to introduce you my honored colleagues, Carlo Di Renzo, Bruna Marzi, and Galina Filipova, and me. Carlo Di Renzo, professor and head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Perugia, and an associate professor at the TOOT Research Institute in St. Petersburg, one of the founders of the World Association of Perinatal Medicine, professor emeritus and honorary doctor of about 20 universities in Europe, Asia, South America, and the United States. I enjoy having patients come to me with complex cases, and I long to help every woman go through a successful pregnancy with the most innovative methods. Bruna Marzi, psychologist and psychotherapist, member of the Italian Order of Psychological Psychotherapists since its creation in 1989. Member of the International Society of Micropsychoanalysis, training analyst of the Italian and Swiss Institutes of Micropsychoanalysis, the author of scientific reports and papers presented at international conferences and congresses. A human being has a basic instinct for micropsychoanalysis. We call it the instinct of attempt. It is the motor that drives humans and animals. Galina Filipova, rector of the Institute of Perinatal and Reproductive Psychology, professor, the founder of the National Psychology of Motherhood, author of a number of techniques and methods which are widely used in the field of psychology of reproduction. Life is a circle from birth to birth. Elena Sergeyenko, doctor of psychology, professor at the Institute of Psychology of the Russian Academy of Science, member of the Presidium of the Russian Psychological Society, formulated new principles of approach to the periodization of mental development, develops such concepts as behavioral control and subjective age of the person. Along with her colleagues, adapted and created a task test of emotional intelligence for adults and children, understanding and reading the mental, a model of a mental. And now
мы предоставляем
And now we are giving the floor to each of our participants, and then we'll come to questions.
Gian,
well, first of all,
Bruna.
Gian or Bruna, who's willing? We decided that I'm going to begin, and Giancarlo will come after me.
Спасибо,
7 минут.
Да, окей. Спасибо большое за такую
Thank you very much for such a great opportunity. First of all, I would like to say a couple of words about the relationship between the mother and the fetus in microanalysis and the opinion of other specialists, first of all, Italian ones. And I would like to start with psychoanalysis, which is really interested in prenatal life and the possibilities that allow to continue researches of prenatal and postnatal life. Italian psychoanalyst Alessandra Pentali, based on her scientists, there was a hypothesis about the personality, prenatal personality, and thus we can define even the future character of the child, different prognoses about the movements and behavior of the fetus. Up to the 4th month, the motoric schemes are unique for all the fetuses, then they are being changed depending on the situation. And we mean that any other action can provoke different abnormalities of feelings. This is the experience of pleasure, this is about different types of psyche, and if this experience has been repeated for several times, it is being fixed and it can be observed even after the birth, especially if there are some repetitions of the same quality of the interaction with the mother. I think that they are common, this is common knowledge, and we should admit that everything is getting more difficult when you talk not only about external stimulus, but about internal factors as well. Women, everything that was written by Kant, the founder of micropsychoanalysis, and so their collaborators, among them Niccolò Rousseau, they focused on the basic conflicts of genetic nature. We should also say that micropsychoanalytical hypothesis about one's life gets back to the 1970s, starting from the first discoveries in terms of genetics and medicine. Hypotheses were based on the changes of psychoanalytical settings, on the increase of the sessions up to 2 to 3 hours. Micropsychoanalysts started to collect material about the aggressiveness and sexuality, which gets back to the life of fetus. His books about psychoanalysis, published in 1983, there was an idea that apart from classical stages of development, oral, anal, genital, there is another one, which gets back to the earlier times. That means that there was a hypothesis about ambivalent interaction between the mother and the fetus, which is called that the war. And indeed, getting back to 1976, the fetus bears 50% of genetic material of the father. That is why we can mean transplantation, that genetical material is being transplanted from one parent to another. Also, we can admit that miscarriage can be a genetical prototype of every other type that is observed in the whole world. The war for protection of the fetus against imaginary criminals, imaginary enemies. Otherwise, without those mechanisms who protects the body from adverse reactions on the background of modern researches and discoveries in biology and genetics, embryon is being stimulated by immune mechanisms of the mother. But in 1976, Pelufo, for the first time, published his book about the processes of transformation. Then he proposed a hypothesis that miscarriage doesn't take place because the conflict is being shifted from somatic to synthetic one. According to Pelufa, a pregnant woman has a double representation of the fetus. From the one hand, it is considered as a disease, which is considered as a threat for her life, but at the same time, it's part of her body. Namely, this narcissistic perception of the fetus can provoke conflicts on somatic level and allow the gestation to go on. During the long therapies, Pelufa has underlined dynamics. He analyzed phenomena that he saw regarding and compared them to our life. The traces of the conflict can be tracked in the emotions provoked by threats, and he analyzed them during the long sessions, analyzed their fantasies, images, and ambivalent dynamics of all their relationships when a human being, a man, can build in their life. Based on these discoveries, we consider it as a tool to analyze this ambivalence, to have an access to the traces of their well-being. Only the experience of those conflicts which are repetitive in the psychoanalytical transference can lead to the full understanding of human ambivalence. And I consider, if I can express this opinion, if in our country the materials could be analyzed, we won't have wars, but unfortunately we can only dream about this. Bruna, thank you very much. And now we give the floor to Gynecology. Then all we will share our views and opinions and start the discussions. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you. So please, the floor is yours, Carlo.
Добрый вечер, спасибо большое. But these are a few words that I know in your nice language. I am very thankful to be part of this seminar in the 25th year of celebration of the Moscow Institute of Psychoanalysis. And I am very thankful to the friend of Bruna Marzi for engineering my invitation with you. My point of view starts from epidemiological observation of around 20 years ago. Epidemiologists were reporting an increase, unbelievably increased number of psychotic disorders, schizophrenia, mental disability in aging people which were born during the Dutch famine of Amsterdam in the Second World War, particularly 8 months between the end of 1944 and the beginning of 1945. In that period, the people were constrained, and also the pregnant women were constrained to have a diet which was not overcoming 800 calories. So they were poor of nutrients and nutrition. This observation prompted others to make a link between the insult, which were particularly affecting the intrauterine life, and many other disorders of adult life. But the first were those which were looking to the psyche of the people. This has been substantiated by many other studies, either experimental in animals, either in humans. And it's now clear that there is a developmental effect on our genes of the environment, which may affect not only the offspring soon after pregnancy, but also may affect adult life. So what is happening during pregnancy and during the early 1 or 2 years of our life is making changes because of our plasticity in that time, also of our brain, of our mind, and can affect the adult. Starting from this observation, this means that our genes are controlled in some way by the environment, and this is called epigenetics. And one of the most important aspects of environment or climate is nutrition. If you think an animal example, the most clear for everybody is the bee. We have two kinds of bee. The working bee, which fly in the fields, which is small and is unfertile. And one big queen bee, which stay in the nest and is 10 times bigger than the other and is fertile. They have the same genes, but the queen bee has been nourished at the beginning through the royal nutrition, which we'll call Papa Reale, and this has changed completely the effect on her genes. This is particularly important in the developing brain as well. It has been shown that nutrition may have either teratogenic effect, so change, for instance, the development of some organs, but more subtle, may change the function of the organ. That is what you study, for instance, in the case of the brain. And this can happen already in intrauterine life. Professor Marzi was already showing that your evaluation of micropsychoanalysis start already from the intrauterine life, and they continue afterwards. And this, from my point of view, that I am an obstetrician gynecologist, is one of the markers to delineate that we have to pay particular attention to the intrauterine life in the first 2 years of life, what we call the magic 1000 days, because these days will affect all our future, either in our, let's say, homeostasis of the organs, our function, but also in our brain. What is most important is to understand that through the nutrition, through the mother nutrition, through the placenta, also toxic chemicals can enter. And these are very dangerous because it is very difficult to determine their amount, but from a disturbing point of view, they can affect and pollute already the unborn child. Because through the mother, if the mother doesn't behave or doesn't pay attention to the environment, many chemicals can enter past the placenta and already be deposited in the unborn child, affecting the function of different organs. These have been demonstrated very well with many chemicals we have around in our house furniture, and also with the nutrients that we have, which may affect very much the life of the individuals. To this point, therefore, that I want to make in order to then to have a fruitful discussion is, first, we have example nowadays that the behavior of people later in life, in adult life, are affected by the intrauterine environment already. And the intrauterine environment is affected by the external environment and even by climate. And the main, let's say, connection between the environment external and the intrauterine environment is the nutrition of the mother. And this is the point that I want to make to you. So My point is that the ecology of the future individual, the ecology of our life, the ecology of our psyche starts in utero. And we have to pay particular attention to this because toxic chemicals affect the intrauterine environment, and affecting the intrauterine environment in a particular period of our development have transgenerational effect, which is another big important point. So my statement is think about the developmental origin of adult disease, whatever they are. Second, think that environment, which is not only the toxic chemical, but also nutrition, drugs, whatever, the lifestyle may affect the intrauterine environment through the mother, and the intrauterine environment may affect the development of the fetus, not only on the several organs, but particularly on the brain. And these are the points I would like to make in order to start then a fruitful discussion. Remember, ecology of the adult, ecology of our psyche start in utero. Спасибо большое. Thank you.
Thank you.
Большое спасибо, Gian Carlo.
Thank you so much, Giancarlo. Then the floor goes to Galina. Please.
Hello, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this event. It's a pleasure for me to take part in such a great discussion with our wonderful colleagues. But additionally, I would like to share with you with my understanding of how psyche is being developed in the prenatal phase. I have been dealing with the subject for a long time. I work with small children, with their parents. I'm an evolutionary psychologist. And I would like to tell you that in comparison to the previous speakers, I'm more to science. We've just heard two wonderful presentations from different positions, points of views. The first one is from the point of view of psychoanalysis, how our conscious works, and the second one, a very serious one about the environment. And it's true that everything starts from the very early stage, even before the conception. And it is a well-known fact that this is a very important thing indeed, but I would like to mention that this presence, the presence of everything which is connected to consciousness, is doubtful. Yes, of course, we do have consciousness, and our psyche is being developed, and our consciousness is being formed very early and has a long story. But let us have a look. During the evolutionary process, we got conscious quite late, but all the mechanisms connected to conception, to gestation, to psych development, all those mechanisms have been formed even before the fact of the conscience was discovered, and everything is quite a late stage. But regarding the events of the prenatal stage and psychic development, cognitive, emotional parts, stress resistance, and even the influence of what happened during prenatal periods, and this is what is well known and what is being studied by physiologists and psychologists as well. I think that it's very useful just not to forget we have strong natural mechanisms apart from conscious, and they allow us to control gestation, and it is confirmed by Russian and Soviet scientists. There are studies about dominance, which divide psychological parts and the positions of how this gestational dominant, which is studied pretty well, is based on the cortex of the brain, and it is responsible not only for emotional but for psycho process too. And it sets the whole system, the whole functionality of the body is not responsible solely for psychological processes, but the attitude of the woman to this event. The gestational dominant can perform the keeping functions, which influences on the fact that a pregnant woman, I will comment later this notion, try to avoid stress, try to not feel deep emotions, and then specialists, based on these studies, can divide different types and styles of experience of a pregnant woman. For example, we can divide several of them. They can seem harmonical without ambivalence, and the gestation flows pretty well. But at the same time, there are different forms of pregnancy. That is why the process is common, but it's very important to understand the whole mechanism of pregnancy, which is also connected to human culture. Additionally, I would like to say that our cultures are so different. In some works of female sociologists, while studying on different tribes in New Guinea, there was a suggestion that our well-known European psychoanalysis, that childish complexes, they do not present in some tribes. That is why the whole picture looks differently. That is why we need to discover this ambivalence, which can influence on the further development of the personality. That is why we see that this is not a common law, which can be applicable to everyone. We should focus on multicultural differences to analyze according to different types. And naturally, about physiology is relevant to everyone. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. We'll move on about the psyche of birth. We have listened to 3 speakers about prenatal periods, and I would like to add that I'm really interested in prenatal periods. You know, the main principle of the birth of psycho, that it is continuous and it starts and can connect different stages of development. And it is true that prenatal phase is very important because this is the beginning of the development. And I would like to once again to get back to Bruna's words that on the prenatal phase, the character, the personality of the child is being formed, and it can underline
который восходит к работам очень уважаемого Готлиба. который опубликовал вот такую свою модель вероятностного
who
эпигенеза,
published his own model
which
of
the model
epigenetics,
was
where
published
the activity
about
of the
the
genes, the activity
neurons,
of
the
the neurons, the
behavior,
activity of the
different
behavior, various cultural,
and
social, and
physical
physical
impact
impact is being taken
at
into
this is
consideration,
food,
and it is the
environment,
food, the ecology, and the social interaction the fetus encounters, and then the child after birth. These are the cultural codes and the cultural values that are being transmitted through emotional attitude towards certain things. And thus, it is, we can talk about a complex principle of development. It's not only the external and internal impact, but their combination, which gives birth to such a unique development of the psyche of every individual. I'm mainly interested in the postnatal period of development. And the main thing which I wanted to show in my works is that the child is not a helpless individual. From the birth, it's being equipped with all the core mechanisms which enable the child to analyze, to cognize, to perceive through self-development, both the physical and social world. I would like to bring as an example the recent works which impressed me greatly. Well, it's a prenatal stage. The child is already able to perceive the speech, the sounds of speech, and recognize the voice of the mother and the father, and can differentiate the speech from all other sounds. And also, the child then, when being born, can recognize the face, and he can orient, or she can orient themselves towards social interaction. So here I believe the ability of a child to categorize objects from the very beginning is very important. Otherwise, the child would reside in the chaos of the physical reality. And the second thing I would like to emphasize is the fact that at a very early stage, the child already has very simple mechanisms of recognizing the possibility for close relationships, by which I mean the ability to establish proximity with somebody else. The recent studies of 2022 showed that children understand who can drink from one bottle, meaning who can share saliva, and this means that this is allowed only to close relatives. And then the child perceives that these are the stronger bonds, the stronger ties. This is a very basic mechanism. The second thing that astonished me greatly was the speech. It's clear that the speech is a very important developmental environment for a human being, but it turns out that babies, newborns, are able not only to differentiate the structure of this flow of speech, but also they are able to understand whether it's of a communicative or non-communicative nature. So these studies, they point to the fact that the child is being born very equipped and very protected individually, and also struggling for his or her own life. That's why when we talk about ecology, about nutrition, prenatal conditions, this is all true, but this enormous number of factors combined together very often give us only the probable development line for the future. We know about toxic substances, we know about sensitive periods of development and early ontogenesis, and nevertheless, the psyche and the individual versions of psyche is not something we are already able to predict, but still we can predict it to a certain extent. And now let's talk about the mind, the conscience. Despite the fact that the mind is the advantage of the humanity, or maybe the misfortune of the humanity, I failed to give the correct assessment of the mind. Maybe that's a bad luck that the mind finally emerged. But I would like also to emphasize anyway the fact that the psyche and the consciousness, it's not the flash of light which enlights the child all at once. No, it's not so. It's a very gradual clarification of the picture of the world around oneself, step by step. Today, I recognize this part of the physical reality, this kind of social relationships, and I shape my personal attitude to these things. So mind and consciousness is very individual and is being shaped in a very gradual form, and I don't know the limit which we can name to be the limit of the mind, when we can say that the mind is totally formed till the end of life. The person, the human being, changes and modifies their mind and their cognition, and that's the fact that professionals of different occupations cannot come to one certain conclusion what the conscience is, what the mind is. This points to the fact that it's a very complex phenomenon. That's why when I respond to the question about the phenomenon of the emergence of the psyche, we could say that the emergence of the psyche is the evolution which the human being came through. And this is also the prenatal, postnatal development of a child, and the development of the future human being. Thank you so much. Probably I'll stop here. Thank you. So now we are continuing our discussion. Maybe next we will ask questions to each other, and then we'll listen to the questions of the audience. So if you have any questions, our panelists, please, you're welcome. So here we've got some questions. Well, probably these are questions to me. This is the question about the skills or the capabilities of the newborn to categorize. And here I should refer to Alan Slater's work from 1970s. Alan Slater is an American scientist, and also I'd like to refer to recent works of French Center of Cognitive Sciences, and well, there's also to the works of the scientific groups that are working in Budapest in Hungary, Georgia. The group of Georgia, they conducted very complex research with the newborns, and they were demonstrating various objects to the newborns, and they proved that the children, the infants, are able to categorize. So when the objects are familiar, they don't fix their gaze that long, and they fix their gaze longer on unfamiliar objects, and they're able to discern the living things from the non-living things. And because the reasons for that are as follows: they are expecting to have some interaction with the living things, and there is a great number of different criteria. So the next question, probably it is the question to Giancarlo. Our listeners are asking, please, what kind of nutrition, what kind of food during the pregnancy is able to impact the development of the brain?
Very good question. I think that you should know that the development of a brain requires a large amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which is much more what you requested later on for the brain function. And particularly omega-3 are incorporated in 45 to 60% of the brain different part, cell and membranes, and therefore a diet which is rich of omega-3, therefore polyunsaturated fatty acids coming from the fish, for instance, are the best for the development of the brain. Studies which have been done postnatal show clearly the visual acuity and the capability of language and speech at the beginning, the first 1 or 2 years of our life, were dependent by the supplementation of omega-3 through the breast milk of the mother. Therefore, other research, which had been now substantiated very well in a recent meta-analysis of more than 30 randomized controlled trials, show that if we supplement omega-3 in pregnancy, we have a much better development of the brain. And also for the mother, there is a less risk of postnatal depression. As you know, omega-3 are affecting, the brain in different parts. One observation that makes this very consistent is that compared to the rest of our body, omega-3 in the brain have a concentration which is in keeping with the omega-6 that are usually 5 to 1 in the rest of the body, but is only 2 to 1. This means that the amount of omega-3 we need for the function of our brain is very high. Therefore, I hope that I have given at least a scientific basis that the brain development is favored by a nutrition which privilege at least 2 to 3 servings per week of fish. And usually fish which is small, because the big fish is mainly contaminated by mercury. And this can, of course, pollute the fetus and create other problems afterwards. I hope that I've been clear.
Спасибо, Жан-Карло. А сейчас, пожалуйста, вопрос это к Бруно от Екатерины Шляхтиной.
The question to Bruna from Ekaterina Shlachtina. She asks to comment the next. It's a wonderful news for me that the character of a child can be programmed during the prenatal stage, but I have some doubts that I heard it actually from you. But how do you comment that? No, this is true. I quoted the studies from Alexander Putelli. He is Italian neurologist and psychoanalyst. Well, basically, she works as neurologist, and she had patients, and she has still, so she studies the behavior of child up to 2 years and the fetus, and according to her findings, the movement of the child from the moment of birth up to 2 years, she managed to formulate that there are repetitive characteristics. So it means that there are some movements, some characteristics that can be expressed and combined with the character of her personality, of his personality. Bruna, may we interpret it as maybe some temperamental characteristics? Yes, that's true, like motorics. Yeah, indeed. Motor skills. Alexandra Putelli, basically, she studied the behaviors of twins. She illustrates some information in comparison to their prenatal life, how they are similar, and how their motor skills are very similar, and at the same time it can describe their interaction within the utero. Thank you very much, Bruna. May I intervene with a comment? Yes, please, Galina. I would like to get back to the question to Bruna and with my colleague. The main idea is that the psychology or the psyche can use, in this language, simple words with another meaning. So it was the idea which character in psychology, for example, and which is defined as character in our daily language, it is not the same thing. When we talk about typical behavior, typical movements, that they are repetitive, it's not about the character itself. The same way, we have different visions on what conscious is, on what feelings are. Again, this is the difference, that the meaning is different. And thank you very much. That is why I believe we need to use more precise language, because as the result, we might have some certain misunderstandings. Definitely, I do agree with you. In our languages, there are some differences, and it's quite tricky to formulate it in the right way. Okay, then we have another question from Ekaterina Shitnikova. I don't know who is the person that should reply on this. The question is how social influence impacts on psyche that woman during the pregnancy tends to have a normal life, daily routine, to be at the same level as a man. Who would like to answer this question? May I? Okay. I deal with it. Again, we need to be more precise. What do we mean by its daily routine, daily life, in comparison to man? What is prohibited during pregnancy? To dive, for example, to do sky diving, to go skiing. Why actually does she tend to have the same routine as a man? We have different lifestyles. At the same time, if her dominant is the right one, she can have enough rest, she can take care of herself and of her emotional state, and not to use any nauseous things, any harmful things for her body, not to exceed with physical activity. So if everything is within the norms, why not? But actually, from my point of view, pregnancy for a woman is a care of herself. If she succeeds to take care of herself, to feel herself good, to feel every single impulse and rhythms of her life and bodies, and the whole body can act, that means that everything will be fine. That we will know and feel better what's going on inside our bodies, our organism, and the environment, the warmth for a child is organized pretty well. That is why we need to understand what do we mean by this question, by abnormal behavior, what kind of lifestyle that can be similar to a male one. Thank you. Thank you, Galina. Well, okay, now I'd like to ask the question from our listeners to Giancarlo. The question is, could you indicate maybe some links about articles on omega-3 acids on the brain development, maybe some sources of the information?
Yeah, of course, there are many studies which have been done, and a very recent, as I say, the meta-analysis produced by the Australian New Zealand College at the point that these Australian New Zealand College of Obstetrics and Gynecology now have implemented the guidelines for the use of omega-3 in a population which is found to be with a low intake of, for instance, fish for several reasons, to supplement in order to ameliorate the performance and the brain development, and also for other aspects of pregnancy. Now I can indicate to you by mail, which are some of the papers which have been published in this aspect. But now the literature is abundant. Started with observation in newborn, and now there are observations in the fetus. If I may, I have a provoking request for you expert, particularly in psychoanalysis. Professor Filippova pointed out a very important point in his presentation, which is the culture and, let's say, ethnic differences that we should take into account when we are dealing with development of something. Now, we have from one side the world that is going to be globalized. We are assuming very homogeneous attitude in some part of the world for nutrition, so overcoming the aspect which were in the past present in many cultures. So we are, homogenizing our culture and try to globalize. These, of course, affect our behavior and nutrition. How much do you think that these going on in the future may affect the development of a consciousness, of the mind, of the psyche? That is a question first for Professor Filippova and then for the other panelists. But from my point of view, it's very interesting to understand what you think about, because Professor Filippova put a seed very important on this. I think that we are changing our cultural environment in many parts of the world. Do you think that this is detrimental for our psyche development, or do you think that we are going to ameliorate? What is your opinion?
Well, if this is the question to me, I will intervene and I will comment. First of all, any culture emerged based on different tribes, ethnical conditions, and different environmental conditions. Now we see that cultures are mixed, but from historical perspectives, everything was connected based on climate conditions, household types. A very small instance in Muslim cultures, they close their faces, that it's very typical of women, but it's quite an old custom. Even men had to close their faces. It was very typical of different regions that they lived in deserts, for example, and they had to do that to protect their faces. Then it formulated cultural differences. About the foods and alimentary habits, it's very important to see what was the basis in their regions. But as the result of our multicultural society and globalization, we have lots of new ideas about how to improve certain fields, what kind of diet should be followed, and it can be beneficial for some people or less beneficial, and it can correspond with their religion, for example, without any additional scientific data, scientific papers. And so this is another question. In this regard, many people follow vegetarian or vegan diets, which are highly recommended for pregnant women too, and for women who prepared to get pregnant. They are recommended not only for the regions where then they are emerged, and they have another nutrition base, but even the genetics. And it is well known that their genetics is different too. There are some genes from one groups which are responsible for different segments that can elaborate proteins, animal proteins, and amino acids, as an example. again, they are all about the traditions. Whether we have scientific papers, yes, we have. And it shows how it can influence on the behavior, how our diets can influence on development of fetus. I believe it's a very important question. From one hand, we have globalization. From the other hand, we have these cultural transferences, and to my mind, they might be even dangerous.
Хочу добавить,
I would like to add a bit, if I may, to the previous question, and I also join you in your question to Giancarlo. So, I would like to say that I believe the response to the question if a pregnant woman is able to lead the same way of life as the men, and also in terms of the nutrition, which can be right or wrong, according to the lifestyle of modern days, all due to globalization. I believe that this kinds of behavior make us pay attention, psychoanalytical attention, to the ambivalence the woman may experience in terms of her pregnancy. Because a thoughtful person or a person who is not experiencing any ambivalence, any kind of profound ambivalence about the pregnancy, then such a person would lead a calmer way of life, and well, such a person would take care of oneself and pay attention to the diet, to the correct diet. And by this I mean not only omega-3, if it's not available, for example. It doesn't mean that a woman should necessarily find such kind of substances, such kinds of food, but just get everything you can get from the nearest markets. I believe we should analyze all these questions from the psychological perspective in terms of female ambivalence towards the pregnancy. Thank you so much. We also have another question here. Probably I wouldn't name the surnames as it takes time. And they ask questions about the keto diet and its impact on the development of the fetus, and also the meaning of products that contain gluten. Ketogenic diet, probably Giancarlo, this is a question to you. Ketogenic diet.
Microfono.
Well, yes, sorry. To enter in details of different diet is a problem, as Professor Filippova already mentioned. There are some global attitude. For instance, she mentioned vegetarian diet, now vegan, that can be useful. But we have to, for instance, not to forget that vegetarian diet are very much lacking of vitamin D. And vitamin D is one essential vitamin for the function of the placenta and development of the fetus. So if we have a diet, nowadays we have the capabilities to examine the diet in the components, and we know what is useful for the best of pregnancy in order to maintain all the activities that are in the trajectory of the genes given by the parents. If I want to change the trajectory, of course I can do with the diet. It has been a couple of big studies done in Scandinavian countries and one in the United States and Mexican, which show that, for instance, the Western Mexican diet is correlated to much more problems in the fetus and in the mother compared to the North European prudent diet, which is, for instance, full of vegetables, of oil, of vegetables oil compared to the animal oil, and so on. As I said, we nowadays having, at least in the developed countries, in the industrialized countries, the possibility to supplement. Professor Marzi was mentioning, maybe we don't have omega-3. Yes, but we can increment, for instance, fish intake, which is similar. So we can change the diet. We don't need to have supplementation. Now, this kind of diet that you mentioned, they are not validated as the best. But probably Professor Filippova said, if we have a cultural environment, a tradition, and you know how strong is the tradition in affecting the behavior of a pregnant woman to follow some rules that are the rules of a mother sometimes, or the rules of the grandmother. This is in contrast with the globalization, which requests to utilize some different, diet, some different substances, and to, for instance, to eat any kind of fruit, any kind of a season, and so on, because they are offered everywhere in any supermarket. But it's not good. So my comment is the following. The best nutrition is the prudent nutrition. Probably the Mediterranean diet is the best by far in the world because it's linked with less problems of pregnancy and for the offspring. The supplementation of omega-3 when needed or other substances, that's important. I don't enter in details. When we have a lack because of cultural, religious attitudes, we have to know this and to correct the diet because I say at the beginning, nutrition is the first vehicle to affect the process of development. Okay? Nutrition not only brings the polluted chemicals, but is already by themselves affecting the development of the fetus. And in the development of the fetus, the brain is the most important, the most vulnerable. And of course, you are an expert, you know that if we believe that our psyche start from the beginning, we have, of course, to have our brain that is developed in the best way. Am I correct?
Спасибо, Giancarlo. Тут нам еще
Yes, thank you, Giancarlo. We're also being asked some questions here, which I will address to all the panelists. And then please choose who's willing to respond to them. The questions are about the impact of the devices, the computers, which people use during pregnancy. What kind of impact do they have on the development of the fetus and of the child? And one other question I would like us to discuss, what impacts the formation of sexual preferences during the prenatal stage? Let's start with the first one, the impact of the computer during pregnancy, the phones during the pregnancy, and other devices. Please, who's willing to start answering? Bruno, maybe you? Well, I don't have such kind of data. Maybe Giancarlo has this data. Yeah, probably. Giancarlo, are you willing to say anything in response about the threats of the computers?
Short answer for both. On computer or telephone, smart telephone, apparently they don't affect, but it's the behavior of mother that may change. What we know is, for instance, music. Music is affecting very much the development of the fetus, and you know that they have a big impact for the offspring, particularly the first years of life after birth. I was a promoter for many obstetricians in Italy to adopt and to encourage some kind of classic music. You know that, I don't know for which reason, but there is abundant evidence that the music of Mozart and some authors of that age are probably the best for the development of the attitude to arts of the offspring. Not, for instance, rock music or pop music, but is the classic music of Wagner, of Mozart, of Vivaldi, which is the best. There are many studies on this. And this has a relaxing effect on the mother, but also a very important effect on the brain development of the fetus. Concerning the second problem, yes, there is an important aspect we have to consider. Nowadays, with the nutrients, we introduce many what we call endocrine disruptors. The endocrine disruptors are substances which are similar to our hormones, take the capability to affect the receptors in the cell, but change the action of the hormones. And these can change our fertility, they provoke a different time of our reproduction, and they can change the attitude toward the sex behavior. So I think that there is some, evidence nowadays that if we introduce these endocrine receptors, which are present everywhere, even the cosmetics that women may use during pregnancy, we may affect the behavior, subsequent behavior, and the sexual performance of the offspring. This is what I scientifically know, but I would like to hear the opinion of Professor Pilippova and Professor Marzi as well.
Да, пожалуйста.
Yes, I may respond. Bruna, but you were willing to say something. No, please, Yes, I can comment both questions. As for the devices and the usage of the devices, there are probably two aspects to this. One of the aspects is those things mentioned by Giancarlo. So the usage of the devices neuroticizes pregnant women themselves. But apart from that, when we explore the phenomena of acceleration, when we explored them in the 80s, we outlined certain factors, and these factors have their own impact on the development of the fetus. And one of those factors was the informational distress. So that was a factor. I was very surprised to learn this. Well, so I think that if this is a prudent usage of devices, then that's okay, because when we use the devices, we stimulate not only the fetus, but we're stimulating the mother and mother's cognitive activity. And we are well aware that there are certain periods during pregnancy when cognitive processes are slowed down. Women are not becoming more stupid, but just their cognitive processes start to be more gradual, more flowing, and that is important to remember. But apart from that, I'd love to say that the excessive usage of devices, and I believe Elena can also comment this, but I think this overloads our visual channels and it disrupts brain rhythms. And since we know that the child only starts to establish and to form the correct brain rhythms, it has an impact. And so from this perspective, the excessive usage of devices is not healthy. As for the second question, in the end of the 20th century, in the beginning of the 21st century, we had vast research of physiology. And we can say there was a body of research about physiological research about stress resulting from the activity of the hormones. And this research demonstrated us that prenatal stress, psychological and physiological stress, distress, both of them, and of course, this research was carried out with help of rats and mice. But still, this kind of stressors, they modify the gender processes and may disrupt sexual behavior, subsequent sexual behavior. And as for the sensitivity levels to estrogens, well, this is well researched. And as for sexual behavior, we have a number of studies with rats and mice. Yes, that's unfortunately we've got such kind of effects. Thank you so much, Galina. Bruno, please. Well, I have said that I don't have any data in terms of the impact the computer has on pregnant women, but I should say I totally agree with the point about the channels. I totally agree with the point about the kinds of information we are talking about, because the channels, the performances, the shows that a pregnant woman is watching constantly, of course, are vital. If this is something cruel and harsh, it has an effect on her psyche, and it means that they're able to impact her relationships with the fetus. And of course, as Carlo well put it, music is beneficial, and especially if it's classical music. We already have strong evidence of this in our long sessions. Quite regularly, we collect the following material. Well, when our patients on a couch, when lying on a couch, are experiencing very strong emotions, and this happens, for example, when they recollect some kind of music and they link words or the music itself with the music the mother was listening during pregnancy, because, for example, they associate this with this period of time, and they make these associations. And of course, we can see some capabilities in terms of creativity and musical arts with such patients. And as for sexual behavior and the choice of a sexual partner, of the sexual object, I can say there is evidence from our long sessions that particular traumas a pregnant woman experienced during the pregnancy, even before the pregnancy, those traumas that a woman had with her previous children, for example, all these things can be transmitted or communicated during the pregnancy, and all this can impact the choice of sexual orientation. If, for example, there was the death of the previous child, the child that was before our patient, our supposed patient, so there was a premature death of a child, or a miscarriage, or death, or an immediate death after birth. Of course, such events have a strong influence on the mother, who is unable to process this trauma, and she's experiencing the next pregnancy, at the same time expecting the next child to be the same gender as the lost one. And Well, in fact, if the child, the newborn, is of a different gender, it brings irritation, a very strong irritation, frustration of the mother. And later on, such kind of frustration and irritation impacts greatly the choice of a sexual object. Thank you, Bruno.
Oh, can I ask a question on this respect? Because
Yes,
Bruna,
of course.
you said something very, very interesting. I believe, as you said, that the impact of a previous death with a previous expectation, for instance, female, characterize the expectation of a subsequent pregnancy, and if it's a boy, the mother may be influencing the attitude. About miscarriage, do you think that, because miscarriage may be that you don't know the sex, but do you have a projection? And in this case, is the mother that hopes to have a girl or a boy and then project these influencing the behavior of the subsequent child? Is possible?
Да, я уверена, что есть такая проекция.
Yes, I'm sure that there is such a projection. Well, such expectations of the mother. And this is connected to a great number of diverse psychological factors. Well, this can be connected to the loss of a previous child who is idealized by the mother, but it also can be connected to some interpersonal conflicts of the mother herself, which have to do with her own relationships with her own mother and father, or with her relationships with her siblings. So there is such a projection of the mother can have on a newborn or on a child in general. And such a projection may have a great impact on the sexual orientation of a child. Yes. Thank you, Bruna. Unfortunately, time flies very fast. We've got very many questions, but still, we have one question we need to discuss, at least briefly. This is the impact of cesarean section on the psychological development of a child. Please, who's willing, be brief. I believe Giancarlo is supposed to respond. I beg your pardon, but I would like to listen to the very beginning from a gynecologist. What's his opinion about it?
Thank you. Spasiba. I think that we have more data that cesarean section may affect particularly three aspects of the offspring. One, increase allergy and atopy. Second, probably the transfer of microbiota from the mother to the fetus is impaired by the operation itself, by using antibiotics. Therefore, the transmission of many aspects of the control of the fetus in the newborn given by the mother are lost by the cesarean section. Third, there is an increase report of obesity in childhood in those born by cesarean section. These are three scientific characteristics. On the aspect of the behavior, I would say that's very difficult because most of the time we do the cesarean section to avoid episode which may affect the neurobehavior, like hypoxia during labor or so on. So there are many affecting and confounding factors for this. But the three which I mentioned scientifically are well proven.
Grazie.
Спасибо. Бруно,
Спасибо.
пожалуйста.
Thank you. Bruno, please.
Спасибо. Что хочу сказать? Да, что, конечно, таких объективных данных
I
у
just want to
нас
say that we don't have such kind of objective data in psychoanalysis as usual. Nevertheless, we have some evidence that in case of cesarean section, the acknowledgement of the object is starting later. So the acknowledgement of the fact that the child is a separate object, is separated from the mother. Because usually we understand it as follows: the very event of childbirth, the birth is being provoked by the fetus, and the absence of such kind of delivery, such kind of birth process enhances the perception of the separation. And as it comes later on, it provokes certain difficulties in separation and in identification for the child. Then, unfortunately, we have this decision that a mother may take to have a cesarean section, and this can be discussed separately because it's even more severe in terms of the trauma.
Очень коротко, хотя информации очень много.
Alina, please try be brief.
Мы несколько раз пытались к этому приступить с разных сторон, и именно в плане...
We tried to find the right approach from terms of psychological aspects, but initially what should be done is to analyze what kind of cesarean section was conducted. As Bruna mentioned, that yes, from the one hand, if it was the decision of the mother, and if the second one, if it was according to prescriptions, what the doctor said, it can be planned and the fetus can be fully developed, or it can be an emergency case, and it can also define the status of the child, and the separation would be completed in different ways. From my point of view, we shall distinguish the situations and we shall choose the right approach. From psychological point of view, we need to listen to the position of the mother. If she considers it as the only opportunity to save herself and to save the child, and the separation will be fine in this case. Or if she feels frustrated, and as they say, this is her choice, we will have lots of difficult consequences. So they are the main positions that should be considered. Thank you, thank you. Well, from my side, I do agree with every speaker, and I would like to add that natural labor is a signal from the mother, a signal from the child. It's the first serious stress which allows to adapt to one another, and if there are no contraindications, it's better to avoid it and to deliver naturally. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is going away and we have very many interesting questions about different types of conception. May I intervene about in vitro fertilization? Yes, we have only 1 minute. Only 1 minute. Today, actually, a conference took place of a Russian Association of in vitro fertilization. All the peculiarities of children are conducted not with the nature of the conception, but they are connected to different diseases which parents got. So that is why the problem is not in vitro fertilization. This is another myth as the cesarean section. So that is why we should discover the nature of the condition of the mother and the father. Yes, we understand. Thank you very much for your comment, but sometimes women doesn't have a choice. Okay, we have so many questions about the birth of psych, but we have to come to conclusion. So that is why I would like to ask our speakers to conclude, to draw the conclusion. We'll have 1 minute, everyone, to conclude the meeting. To summarize everything that was said, thank you. Please remember, Carlo, you are the first one. You have 1 minute.
So I would like to thank, first of all, it was a very pleasant discussion, also between us, not only from the question of the audience. First point, remember that what we do during intrauterine life and the first 2 years of our life impact adult life in the function and development. Second, nutrition is the most important vehicle of anything which comes from environment inside the uterus. Third, whatever is the system that we use for influencing the fetus, the culture, heritage, religious behavior, nutritional arrangements, attitude of globalization, and so on, may impact very much and may have a different aspect of output, which are not just the phenotype, but the brain development, the psyche, and the development of our consciousness, okay? And it has been underlined. Modification of the diet, we know nowadays how to do for the better of the fetus, and I think that we have to try to study more either the in vitro fertilization technique, either the way we interfere with the natural childbirth in order to understand if these impact clearly the future of mankind. This is my conclusion.
Спасибо, Giancarlo. Bruno, пожалуйста.
Thank you very much. Now, Bruna, this is your turn. Thank you. Thank you. I do appreciate this organization. Thank you very much for your invitation to take part in such a fruitful discussion. And I would join everything that Giancarlo said. And it was a pleasure for me to divide this topic with our colleagues. This topic is very important because we talk about the development not only of our children, but also about the whole society. I would like to highlight one aspect that I mentioned from the very beginning of my presentation about the ambivalence. Ambivalence is not about something that is done consciously, that we can regulate, we can fix based on our conscious. This is about ambivalence, which regulate the gestation, the pregnancy, and our attitudes. That is why it's highly important to attract attention on ambivalence of a woman and of a man when they decide to start a family in order to, yes, if it's possible, of course, in order to consider additional help of psychotherapists or psychologists to get assistance. Thank you. I have to interrupt you because you have only 1 minute. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruna. Galina, please. Just a couple of more words. Well, thank you very much, Dan. I think that the most important result of our discussion is that we have lots of questions and that we have listened to our listeners and from ourselves how many questions and aspects and topics for discussion we have. Discussion of this reality. I think this is my takeaway. Thank you. And from my side, questions from the audience: what literature, what papers should be read? And our speakers have read lots of articles and papers about prenatal psychology, postnatal psychology. Just go to the internet, type to the Google our names, and you'll find lots of literature to read. And I would like to express my gratitude to all of the participants. It was such a pleasure to interact with you, Gian, Carlo, Bruna, Galina, and of course all the questions from our listeners were wonderful. So with this, we conclude our discussion. Once again, I thank you all for your interest to this conversation. Thank you, dear participants, dear listeners, for your questions. The whole cycle of our discussions, Life as a Miracle, you can find the accounts of our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our news, follow our interviews, and see you soon. Goodbye. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Siva. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.